My story to becoming a Muslim probably isn't your typical one. My name's Ahmed now, but obviously that wasn't always the case. I changed it after taking my Shahada, not because I had to, but because it just felt right. Like, this name reflected who I really was inside, and honestly, I felt proud to carry it. My family's always been quite open-minded, so they didn't really bat an eye. They knew me, knew my journey, and to them it was just typical me, doing something unexpected but authentic. I was born in Britain, but because of my parents' work, we moved around quite a bit. I spent my early years across a few different European countries. That meant I picked up a couple languages pretty naturally. French and Spanish were the first two I became comfortable with. It wasn't even something I thought too much about, it was just how life was. Speaking more than one language is sort of normal when you grow up in Europe, but Arabic, that one hit different. I still remember the first time I really heard Arabic properly. My parents had taken us on a holiday to Tunisia. I didn't know what was being said, obviously, but something about the way it sounded just stuck with me. It was melodic, and I just liked the way it sounded. It just moved me in a way French or Spanish never did. The second time was a trip to Egypt. We went to see the pyramids, classic tourist stuff, but it was the Cairo streets that pulled me in more. The chaos, the language, the food, the call to prayer echoing through the city. It was beautiful and intense all at once. I didn't realize it then, but I was slowly being pulled closer towards Islam. By the time I was in my early teens, I was hooked on watching cultural documentaries. Call me a nerd if you want, but I just loved seeing how people lived in different parts of the world. I wasn't just into the visuals, I paid attention to language, customs, mannerisms, everything. I remember one night stumbling across this documentary on North Africa, and they briefly mentioned this country called Mauritania. I'd never heard of it before. It looked like a massive desert with barely anything there, but for some reason it stayed in my head. So I started digging. I found out they spoke Arabic, specifically a dialect called Hassania Arabic. And unlike other North African dialects I'd come across, this one sounded very different. It was spoken mostly by Bedouin Arabs, and I thought that was proper cool. Not to mention, Mauritania is barely ever talked about. Everyone I knew learning Arabic went for Egyptian or Levantine dialects. Me? I wanted something different. It probably helped that I already had some Arab mates, mostly Tunisians and Algerians, because of how close Europe is to North Africa. I'd picked up a few basic phrases from them, but nothing major. Still, I was getting more and more curious about the Arab world, and my focus kept circling back to Mauritania. There was just something about it I couldn't explain. That's when I really started diving into YouTube and trying to find anything I could about Mauritania. It was mostly local news, tribal poetry, or clips of old men talking in tents, but I was obsessed. And then, one day, I stumbled upon a video of this Mauritanian sheikh called Mohammed Al-Hassan Weled Al-Didu. He was the one that put me on the path to Islam. I didn't know much about Islam at that point, but watching him speak led me to the deen. The way he explained things, the depth of his knowledge, it amazed me. He's like an encyclopedia of knowledge. I didn't even understand most of what he was saying at the time, but there was this presence about him. That's when the language stopped being just about culture for me. It became religious. I started watching more Islamic lectures, reading translations of the Quran, and slowly everything started clicking. I wasn't raised with any religion, but there was always a spiritual itch that nothing else had scratched. Islam just made sense. The more I read, the more I listened, the more peace I felt. No pressure from anyone, no dramatic event, I just knew, and eventually I took my Shahada. That moment changed everything. After reverting, I committed hard. I started learning how to pray properly, fasting, reading Quran, doing my best to live according to the deen. And Arabic, I doubled down. I wanted to understand the Quran in its own language, not just read a translation. And guess what? Learning Hassania ended up being a massive help. A lot of people dismiss it because it's not mainstream, but it's way closer to classical Arabic than people realize. It helped me get a proper foundation in MSA, and I'll always tell brothers and sisters, if you're serious about Arabic, don't sleep on Hassania. Anyway, once I'd made some real progress in Arabic and got the basics of the deen down, I decided it was time to put it all to the test. I wanted to live in an Arab country and actually use the language. Most people expected I'd go to Saudi Arabia or maybe even Jordan, but nah. I went with Egypt first, but only as a stepping stone. My eyes were still set on Mauritania. After taking my Shahada and spending months self-studying Arabic and Islam, I knew I needed to test myself in a proper Arabic-speaking environment. I'd learned enough to hold basic conversations and follow along in lectures, and I wanted to see what real immersion would do for my language and my connection to the deen. Naturally, I looked at Egypt. It made sense. Egypt is sort of the default destination for a lot of brothers learning Arabic. It's relatively affordable, easy to get to, and has some decent language institutions. Plus, the community of foreign students there is massive, so I knew I wouldn't be alone. But more than anything, I wanted to see what it was like living in a Muslim country, not as a tourist this time, but as someone trying to build a life around the deen. Cairo, when I arrived, was exactly what people said it would be. Loud, overwhelming, chaotic. You never really get used to the traffic. It's not just the noise, it's the sheer unpredictability of it. Cars honking constantly, people walking wherever they want, and microbuses pulling over with no warning. But buried in all of that madness was a kind of raw beauty. Everything was happening at once, but somehow it all worked. People were warm, the food was great, and the pace of life made you feel like you were truly in the middle of something bigger than yourself. The call to prayer there cut through all the noise. You hear it echoing from every corner, and even in a city that never seems to stop moving, there's this brief moment of calm when the call to prayer sounds. It was the first time in my life I saw entire blocks of men stopping whatever they were doing, grabbing a prayer mat, and lining up outside shops or on the pavement. No excuses, no trying to squeeze it in later. I remember thinking, this is what it means to center your life around Allah. It's not just a belief, it's baked into the way of life here. I met brothers from all over, Sudan, Malaysia, France, the US, everyone there with different backgrounds but with the same goal, to grow in the deen and improve their Arabic. A few of them converted like me, which helped. There's a unique bond you form with other brothers that converted, especially when you're navigating everything for the first time together in a completely new place. The locals were welcoming, sometimes even a bit confused by me. I was this white British guy with an obviously non-Arab face, but then I'd bust out Arabic and it would catch them off guard in the best way. They'd light up, ask where I was from, how I'd learned. Sometimes it felt like a superpower, breaking that initial barrier with just a sentence or two. Even though my Egyptian dialect was rough, they respected the effort. But as time went on, something fell off. Don't get me wrong, Cairo taught me a lot. I improved my Arabic, deepened my understanding of Islam, and built friendships that I still hold on to. But there was this constant noise, this busyness that made it hard to focus. I was learning, yes, but not in the way I wanted to. It started to feel like I was chasing Islamic knowledge in a place that was more about surviving the day than reflecting on the deen. That's when I remembered why I started this journey in the first place. Before all the lessons, before the formal studying, it was the Hassania dialect that first pulled me in. That old, poetic, almost untouched form of Arabic spoken by the Bedouins of Mauritania. I'd spent so many hours watching videos from there, listening to their speech, trying to mimic the accent. I'd fallen in love with the rawness of it, the closeness to classical Arabic, the nomadic simplicity, the dignity in their way of life. Egypt was teaching me how to live as a Muslim in the modern world, but Mauritania, it felt like the place where people lived like they were centuries behind in the best possible way. So I made a decision. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Most people couldn't even point to Mauritania on a map, let alone imagine living there. But for me, it was personal. It was the country that sparked this whole journey. I didn't want to just learn Arabic. I wanted to live it. I wanted to see what it felt like to be surrounded by a people whose entire culture was shaped by the language of the Quran. So I started planning. I spent months preparing, working out visas, flights, costs, even getting basic vaccinations for traveling into the desert. I got in touch with brothers who had studied there, just to make sure I wasn't walking in blind. Everyone said the same thing. Mauritania is not for everyone, but but if it's for you, it will change your life. And honestly, I wanted something that would pull me out of the dunya a bit. Cairo was amazing, but it was still a city, still full of distractions. I craved something quieter, something older, something rooted. I wanted to sit under the shade of a tent and hear the Quran recited in a dialect that had barely changed for centuries. The contrast between Cairo and where I was headed couldn't have been sharper. On one hand, I had just left one of the loudest, most populated cities in the Arab world. On the other, I was about to enter a country where camels still roamed freely and scholars taught students by candlelight in sand-covered huts. And I wasn't romanticizing it either. I knew what I was getting into. Tough conditions, intense heat, limited infrastructure, but that was part of the appeal. I wasn't looking for comfort, I was looking for clarity, and deep down, I think I knew Mauritania would give me that. Flying into Nouakchott, I remember looking out the window and thinking, where is everything? No skyline, no big highways, no skyscrapers in the distance, just sand, scattered buildings, and more sand. After the chaos and constant movement of Cairo, Mauritania felt like I'd landed on a different planet altogether. And honestly, that's exactly what I wanted. There was a stillness to it, the kind that hits you the moment you step outside the airport. No endless honking, no rush, just desert wind. It felt like time had slowed down. Not in a lazy way, more like in a purposeful, stripped back kind of way. I remember taking a deep breath and feeling like, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be right now. My first few days were a bit of a shock to the system. The heat was brutal, even more so than Egypt, and the infrastructure was minimal, but I didn't come here for comfort. I came to experience the disconnect from the modern world. And Mauritania delivered on all of that. People here still live like their Bedouin ancestors who made the journey from Yemen centuries ago. The Baden, the Arab Mauritanians, traced their roots directly back to the Banu Hassan tribes of Yemen. They were warriors, travelers, and poets, true desert people, and you can still see that in the way they live. The men wear long flowing dara'a robes, the women in vibrant melfas, and they speak a dialect named after their tribe, Hassania Arabic, that sounds unique yet still classical. That's what amazed me the most. After spending all that time studying Arabic, sitting in classrooms, and memorizing grammar tables, I was suddenly surrounded by people who lived the language I had spent years chasing. It truly felt surreal, like I was in a dream. And it's true, Hassania is incredibly close to classical Arabic. That's why I always recommend it to brothers and sisters who are serious about learning the language. It resonated with me, but if you feel another dialect resonates with you, learn it, you won't regret it. Reciting the Quran, after hearing it spoken daily in a similar register, it made the words come alive. It gave them weight. What struck me too was how diverse Mauritania is. It's not just one group of people living out in the desert. Alongside the Baden, you have the Haratin, our black brothers and sisters who are descendants of slaves, many of whom still live in close-knit tribal communities. Then there are immigrants from all over West Africa, Senegal, Mali, Gambia. Despite the difficult history between different communities, the people I met lived side by side in a way that felt genuinely peaceful. Everyone had their own customs, their own rhythms, but they shared the same language and the same love for Islam. Life there isn't easy, but that's part of what makes it so grounding. I'd wake up to the sound of goats outside my window, walk dusty roads to a halakha under a tent, and sit on the floor while a sheikh taught from memory with nothing but a wooden board and a student scribbling notes beside him. No mics, no PowerPoints, no unnecessary distractions. Just knowledge being passed down the way it's been done for centuries. That's what makes Mauritania special. It hasn't sold itself to modernity. Not completely, anyway. While the rest of the world's racing forward, Mauritania seems content walking at its own pace. A slower, more deliberate pace. A pace that leaves room for Allah. One moment that will always stay with me. I was sitting in a tent with a few young brothers from different backgrounds, some Baden, some Haratin, and we were all sipping tea, going back and forth in Hassania. One of them asked me how I, a white British guy, ended up in the middle of Mauritania, speaking like I'd grown up in the tribe. I told him the truth. that I discovered Hassania online, that it led me to Islam, and that I came here because this land and this language gave me something no one else did: clarity. He laughed and said, "We're trying to leave, and you came here chasing us." And we both laughed, because it was true. A lot of the locals dream of moving abroad, chasing what they see as opportunity. Meanwhile, I'd left the West behind, chasing a kind of simplicity they'd grown up with, and maybe even taken for granted. But for me, that simplicity was everything. In Mauritania, there were no flashy masjids, no Instagram Dawa celebrities, just students sitting on sand, teachers reciting from memory, and people living the deen. I finally felt like I wasn't just studying the language, I was living it. Walking in the footprints of people whose ancestors brought Islam and Arabic across the Red Sea from Yemen all the way to the far fringes of the Arab world. Leaving Mauritania wasn't easy. There's something about that place that stays with you, the stillness, the simplicity, the feeling of being completely unplugged from the noise of the modern world. But eventually, reality kicks in. I had responsibilities to wrap up and studies to finish back in Europe, and deep down, I knew Mauritania, beautiful as it was, wasn't a permanent fit for the kind of life I'd need to build long term. So I headed back to Europe. Coming home was a strange experience. I was the same person, but everything around me felt different. When you've lived in a place like Mauritania, where people spend hours just sitting under a tent drinking tea and discussing Quran, you come back and realize how fast-paced and transactional life in the West can be. It's like everyone's in a rush to go nowhere. Still, I was grateful. I had the chance to continue my education, access resources, and maintain a stable life, all while continuing to practice the deen. Alhamdulillah, my family remained supportive through it all. They saw my reversion not as a sudden personality shift, but as a natural extension of who I've always been: curious, drawn to other cultures, and not afraid to take the road less traveled. They didn't just tolerate it, they respected it. That made things a lot easier. During this phase, I stayed consistent with my Arabic. I'd study Quran daily, attend classes, and help out at the local masjid where I could. I also found myself naturally drawn to helping other reverts, especially those just starting out. I knew how isolating it could be at the beginning, and if I could be that familiar face that says, "Yeah, I've been there too," that mattered to me. Then, one day, I received another major blessing. I met a Syrian sister through mutual friends in the community. We got talking, slowly at first, about faith, about Arabic, about our journeys. When I first spoke to her in Arabic, she paused mid-sentence. "Wait, you speak Arabic?" I nodded. "Where are you from?" she asked. "England." "No, seriously, like, where are your parents from?" "Still England." That's always the funny part. People never expect someone like me to bust out Arabic, but I think that made it easier for her to connect. She saw that I had invested in the deen, not just spiritually, but culturally and linguistically too. I wasn't trying to become an Arab. I was just someone who loved Islam deeply, and that love naturally extended to the language of the Quran. Alhamdulillah, we got married not long after. Marriage brought its own lessons. It's one thing to be practicing on your own, but building a household built on Islam is another level entirely. We both had the same vision though, to raise a family on the deen, continue growing together, and eventually make hijrah, to settle in a Muslim country long term. That desire never left me. Even now, with life in Europe being relatively stable, that itch to go back out into the world, to find a place where Islam isn't just something you practice, but something that surrounds you, is always there. My time in Mauritania definitely shaped that. It taught me that you don't need much to live a good, meaningful life. You don't need fancy tech or constant distractions. You need sincerity, a strong connection to Allah, and a space that nurtures your soul. But I also recognized that Mauritania, as incredible as it is, might not be the best fit for the life we're building now. The career I've chosen requires access to certain resources, and raising a family comes with new needs: schooling, healthcare, stability. Mauritania was perfect for me when I was a student, a seeker, trying to disconnect from the dunya and reconnect with Allah. But it's not necessarily where I'd want to raise a young family long term. That said, I always recommend it to brothers who are serious about seeking knowledge. If you're someone who wants to experience traditional Islamic learning away from the noise of modern life, Mauritania is gold. Just know what you're signing up for. These days, my wife and I talk often about where we might move, maybe somewhere in the Gulf or a quieter part of North Africa. Not necessarily because we dislike the West, but because we want our children to grow up in a society where Islam isn't the exception, it's the norm, where hearing the call to prayer isn't rare, where modesty isn't a battle, where Ramadan feels like Ramadan and not just an inconvenience. At the same time, we know hijrah isn't something you rush into emotionally. It takes planning, vision, tawakkul, and the right intentions. For now, we're focused on building a strong Islamic household wherever we are. That's the foundation. If we raise our kids with strong faith, strong Arabic, and strong morals, then wherever we end up, we've already done the most important work. But yeah, the dream is still there. One day, inshallah. Looking back on everything, reverting to Islam, learning Arabic, living in Mauritania, getting married, it's mad how it all came together. And I don't say that in some poetic, cinematic kind of way. I mean it in the realist, most grounded sense. None of this was overnight. It was all small steps, small decisions, and Allah guiding me one stage at a time. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the journey to Islam is different for everyone. No two reverts have the same story. Some people come to Islam through friends, some through marriage, some through crisis, and others, like me, through a random obsession with a language that slowly pulled everything else into place. I didn't revert because of a single emotional moment or some dramatic turning point. It was gradual, it was logical, it was peaceful. Islam just made sense to me. It answered the questions that had been nagging at me for years. And once I started learning more about the oneness of God, about the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, about how Islam fits into every part of life, I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. What really helped me was learning Arabic. And I say this not to sound like some language elitist, but because it changed my connection to the religion. I get it. Arabic can feel intimidating at first. The script, the grammar, the dialects, the speed. It's a lot. But once you get past that first hurdle, it opens doors you didn't even know existed. Reading the Quran in Arabic, understanding khutbahs, praying with full awareness of what you're saying. It's a different level. For me, Hassania Arabic played a huge role. I know most people don't go that route, and that's fine, but Hassania gave me the love for the deen, something close to the Quran. It wasn't the polished Arabic you hear on Al Jazeera News. It was the kind of Arabic you only hear on the ground. It made the Quran more familiar. It connected me to people I never would have spoken to otherwise. It even led me to meeting my wife. That's why I always encourage reverts, especially brothers, to learn Arabic. Not because it makes you more authentic, but because it helps you own your relationship with the deen. You won't always have a translator, you won't always have a YouTube video, sometimes you need to stand in the prayer line and just know what's being said, or open a page and read it in the same language it was revealed in. That's powerful. But aside from the language, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is this: take your time. Islam isn't a sprint. You don't need to become a scholar in your first year. You don't need to have it all figured out. Some of the most damaging pressure comes from thinking you have to transform overnight. Allah doesn't expect perfection. He expects sincerity, effort, and consistency. I've made mistakes along the way. Everyone does. You'll slip. You'll doubt. You'll feel isolated. Sometimes you'll miss what you left behind. Other times you'll wonder if you're doing it right. That's all part of it. Don't let that make you feel like a failure. Keep praying, keep learning, keep moving. Also surround yourself with the right people. Being a revert can feel lonely if you're doing it all on your own. Try to find a local masjid where you're welcomed. Get involved. Build genuine friendships. And don't be afraid to ask for help. You're not weak for admitting you need support. You're smart for recognizing it. And lastly, never lose sight of the bigger picture. This dunya isn't the goal, it's just the road. Islam isn't here to crush your individuality, it's here to align your life with the deen. The more you lean into that, the more peaceful things become, even when life isn't easy. Now that I'm a bit further along in the journey, I still feel like a beginner, but a more grounded one. I've got a wife, a home, a plan, and inshallah, a future that includes raising a family rooted in Islam. The idea of hijrah is still in the back of my mind, moving to a place where the deen is part of the fabric of life. But even if that doesn't happen straight away, I know I'm on the right path. For any brothers or sisters reading this, especially reverts, just know you're not alone. There are so many of us out here figuring it out one day at a time. You don't need to be perfect. Just be committed, be patient with yourself, and don't let anyone rush your process. Islam isn't about performance, it's about submission, and in that submission, there's beauty, strength, and peace. Alhamdulillah for every step. Alright mate, just read through Ahmed's story, and wallahi it's a proper reminder of how Allah guides who He wills and how He wills. What stood out wasn't just that he became Muslim, but how he went about it. It wasn't through a dawah table, a lecture, or a friend. It was a love for Arabic, a curiosity about language that turned into a path to the Quran, to Mauritania, to Islam. That's not something you plan. That's Allah's wisdom working in quiet ways. And what I really respect is that he didn't rush it. He took his time, learnt the deen properly, understood the language, built a foundation, and now look, he's married, grounded, and living Islam with clarity. For anyone out there thinking about Islam or newly Muslim and feeling a bit lost, Ahmed's story is proof that you don't have to have it all figured out on day one. Just keep moving, keep seeking. Allah will do the rest. If you rate stories like this, real Muslim journeys with sincerity, struggle, and reflection, make sure you subscribe, like, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories coming soon, inshallah. Catch you in the next one.